For the next two sessions, I'm going to be setting the stage for our story and introducing some of its main characters. I'll be discussing things like pre-Columbian Native American culture, some of the factors that led Europeans to begin exploring the New World, and we'll talk a little bit about the first English settlements in North America. By the end of these two segments, we're going to see the Spanish firmly in control of a vast empire in Central and South America, and we're going to see England, France, and the Netherlands well on their way to colonizing North America. Most importantly, however, we're going to see some of the patterns that are going to shape and characterize our story for the rest of the semester begin to emerge during these early formative years of the colonial era. So then, let's go ahead and get started. Some of the first inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere came here during the last ice age from Asia. Now, these migrants traveled here over a land bridge that had been exposed during that ice age. Without turning this into a geography class, during an ice age, sea level drops dramatically, with most of the world's water being trapped in glacial ice. When sea level falls, it exposes dry land that wasn't there previously. So again, these migrants are coming out of Asia, again, about 10 to 15,000 years ago, and they will become the inhabitants of North and South America. Over a period of time, these groups of migrants are going to form a variety of very diverse cultures, and a lot of that diversity is going to depend greatly on their geographic region. We'll see hunter-gatherers in some areas and farmers in other areas. And again, a lot of that is determined by their environment. In the end, these migrants will eventually become thousands of ethnic groups with a variety of different languages and cultural traditions. We're not just talking about one group of people. When we use the term Native American, we're talking about a variety of different ethnic groups, each with its own distinct identity. Another characteristic of pre-Columbian Native America is that there's going to be a large population here. In the several millennia since those migrants arrived, the population is going to grow to about 50 or 60 million. Now, granted, this is a rough estimate. We have no way of knowing exactly how many people lived here prior to the arrival of the Europeans, but it is estimated that between 50 and 60 million people lived in North and South America combined. What we do know for sure, however, is that a relatively small portion of those people inhabited North America. The bulk of that Native American population resided in and around Central and South America in the Aztec and Inca empires. The population of North America was relatively small by comparison. Taking a look at our map here, we see that, again, the route that these migrants took out of Asia during the last ice age brought them into North America, and then of course later on into Central and South America as well. And we see a variety of geographic landscapes here, and that's going to be a large determining factor in terms of what type of cultures will emerge in these various areas. And looking at this map, we see just kind of a sampling of how diverse Native American culture is going to be during this time period. When Europeans arrived, they saw a single group of people characterized by technological primitive lifestyles. So again, they failed to notice that this was a diverse group of people. And again, we see here geographical regions, eastern woodlands, we see primarily farmers and small villages. Our open plains in the central part of North America, we see hunter-gatherers and nomads. Pacific Northwest, we're looking at a culture more heavily dependent on fishing and tied more closely to the ocean. So again, a variety of different groups of people. Within each region, we see numerous ethnic groups. Within each ethnic group, there will be numerous villages and chiefdoms that make up those particular ethnic groups. So we're looking at a society that's very complex and very diverse, rather than the uniform group of people that the Europeans perceive them to be. An important thing to remember about pre-Columbian Native American culture is that it was highly organized and complex. Native societies were very often stratified societies wherein there was many different levels of society. From at the bottom of society, we have peasants and craftsmen, artisans. There were merchants. There were noble classes and aristocrats, and of course chiefs and priests at the top of society. Again, very similar to any civilization, we see these multiple layers of society. We see also highly complex political structures, from chiefdoms and empires that are controlled by city-states. Again, we see a level of complexity here in Native American culture that we see in other regions of the world, Egypt, China, Europe. The same sort of society, social structures, and political structures that we see everywhere else are present here in pre-Columbian Native America. In some instances, we'll see some of these civilizations reaching the point of empires, centered around large city-states and controlling vast territories. Primarily, this takes place in Mexico and South America with the Aztecs and the Incas. We don't see much of this level of civilization in North America. Cahokia, an early chiefdom centered around what is today St. Louis in the Mississippi River Valley, is the closest example we see in North America. And this city of Cahokia had begun to decline many centuries before the Europeans ever arrived in the New World. Looking at our map here, we get a better idea of where some of these places are located. Our Aztec Empire centered in Mexico. The Mayan civilization, while they were once a predominant society in Central America, they will have declined many centuries prior to the arrival of Europeans. When the Spanish arrived in Central America, the Mayans had all but been absorbed into the Aztec Empire. In South America, we see the Inca Empire stretched along the Andes Mountains in the western part of South America. Again, we see several examples of imperial level civilization, whereas in North America we only see the very beginnings of a large-scale chiefdom beginning to take shape, but it had declined many centuries prior to the arrival of the Europeans. Taking a look over in Europe, well, at the same time, we're going to see Europe undergoing a transformation. The Renaissance taking place in the 13th and 14th centuries. Basically, Europe is undergoing a transformation. Social, cultural, economic, political transformations all taking place in Europe. Some of this is due to increased contact with Asia. During these centuries, overland trade between the Mediterranean and East Asia had brought a lot of new products and new ideas into European society. Things like perfume, spices, and silk all had worked their way into European culture by way of these overland trade routes with Asia. Also, word of what life was like in Asia began to work its way into European society. Explorers like Marco Polo during the late 13th, early 14th century traveled extensively throughout Asia and China during his travels. He is going to bring back tales and stories of what life was like in these far-off lands. He'll bring back with him some of these products and, of course, ideas that people in Europe have never seen or heard of. Marco Polo is going to write down basically a travel memoir, an account of his travels, and he's going to discuss all the ideas and the things that he saw, the people he met, the experiences that he had. And this book will eventually circulate throughout European society. People will read this, they will become familiar with and intrigued by what life is like in China, in Asia. They'll also develop a taste for these imported Asian goods. These spices and silks and perfumes, they were all very exotic goods to the Europeans. They'd never seen anything like this before. So over a period of time, the European market is going to develop a taste for these new ideas and new products. They're going to want more of them. So what we see developing here is a demand for these new ideas and products. This demand is going to provide an economic incentive for Europeans to begin looking beyond their borders for new opportunities. At the same time, we see Europe being exposed to new ideas and products. We see European society undergoing a political transformation. In about the same time, 13th century, we see various outbreaks of the plague, particularly in 1347, when more than a third of Europe's population was wiped out by outbreaks of the plague. And this is going to have a huge impact on the political structure of European society. Prior to this time period, Europe under the feudal system was characterized by many dozens and dozens of small kingdoms and principalities, all of them independent, doing their own thing. There were no what we think of in terms of nations, modern nations that we see today, where we have the nation of England and France and Spain and Germany and so forth. None of those entities existed under feudalism. Within the French culture, there were many small kingdoms in what we think of as today as France, and same thing with England and everywhere else in Europe. The decimation of European population is going to cause a lot of these smaller, weaker kingdoms to be absorbed by their larger, more powerful neighbors. For example, if you're the king of a small kingdom in Central Europe and your population is wiped out by the plague, you are essentially the king of nothing. So what's going to happen is that your kingdom will be absorbed by your neighbor who was less affected by the plague. What's going to happen in the end is that we're going to see consolidation of power and territory in European society. Some kingdoms will grow larger, they'll consolidate territory, they'll consolidate their power, they'll absorb some of their weaker neighbors, and we'll see the idea of the nation begin to emerge in European politics. So the nation states, the nation of France, the nation of England, we're going to start to see these entities begin to take shape over this time period. And that's going to take a couple hundred years, obviously, but we're going to see the beginnings of this taking place in the wake of the plague. So decline of feudalism, the rise of the nation state, we see consolidation of power. What's going to end up happening is that this is going to lead to an increase in international rivalries. As these nations begin to grow and spread their influence, they're going to start competing with each other. There's only so much territory in Europe, so once you've claimed as much territory as you can, you start competing with your neighbors for what little territory there is left. What ends up happening is that if you want to expand any further, if you want to expand your influence or to gain new territories, you're going to have to start looking outside of Europe for new opportunities. So the rise of the nation states, this political restructuring of Europe, is going to be one of the things that provides a political rationale for exploration and expansion into new territories. So so far we've got an economic incentive here with our increased demand for Asian goods and ideas. We've got a political motivation now for acquisition of new territories and influence. But no matter how bad we want new territories or we want to spread our influence, if we don't have the skills and abilities to do it, it's not going to happen. And that's what's going to happen here with our advances in navigation and shipbuilding. One of the many ideas and products that are coming into Europe from Asia is developments in shipbuilding technology. New types of ships, larger, more sturdy ships, new ways of navigating. For instance, the compass and the astrolabe, both navigational aids, are both going to be imported to Europe from Asia by way of Arab trade networks. Everyone knows what a compass is. An astrolabe is essentially a device that allows you to calculate your position on the ocean by way of your observation of the stars. It's kind of a precursor to the sextant. It's another more modern navigational device. Lateen cells are just a development in shipbuilding and rigging wherein the sails are positionable and maneuverable, allowing the ship to maneuver against the wind. Basically, a ship with lateen sails can sail in pretty much any direction that it wants to. So with these new developments in technology, we see shipbuilding in Europe become far more advanced than it had been in previous centuries. One man is going to put all this stuff together. A Portuguese prince named Henry, nicknamed the Navigator, he's going to put together a school of navigation in Portugal. And he's going to combine these new navigation techniques, the new shipbuilding technology, and Portuguese sailors and shipbuilders are going to benefit from this. We're going to start to see the Portuguese kind of take the lead in exploration among their European neighbors. The Caravel is it's kind of the culmination of all these new technologies. It's a larger, more sturdy ship, able to carry heavier cargo and a larger crew. It's more ocean-worthy than previous European ships. So now we've got all the pieces in place here. We've got demand for new ideas and goods, creating an economic incentive. We've got political transformation, giving us a rationale for our international competition. And we now have the skills and the abilities and the resources to make all this happen. So our primary goal among European nations is to find a shortcut to Asia. This is the prize. This is what they're all after. For years they have been exposed to these new goods and ideas coming out of Asia, and they want it for themselves. Up until this point, they've been at the mercy of traders from the Indian Ocean, the Arab trade networks, bringing these goods and technology into Europe. But Europeans they're hungry for more. They want more than just what the Arab traders are willing to sell them. They want to be able to buy directly from the source. So the prize here is a shortcut to Asia. If European merchants can find a shortcut to Asia by way of the sea, then they can get around the middleman. And again, they'll have greater direct access to the goods, greater variety, greater selection, a better price, and of course they'll be able to bring the stuff home directly and sell it to their markets without having to pay the middleman. This is important because in business, the more you can control various aspects of your business, the more profit you're going to make. So this is our prize. This is our goal, the water route to Asia. One person who's going to really have a kind of a radical approach to this is a guy named Christopher Columbus. He's an Italian sailor who, like many others at the time, he believed that the world was round. And while this was not a new idea, again, a round earth theory had been proposed by scientists and scholars in ancient Egypt, but it still hadn't really gained widespread popularity. Columbus was among many who believed that the world was round, but again, not a lot of people were willing to risk their fortunes on this theory, this yet unproven theory. Columbus said, here's how we can do this. We can get a shortcut to Asia by just sailing west. If we just sail west over the horizon, we will eventually run into the east coast of China or Southeast Asia, Indonesia, those East Indies islands. This was Columbus's big plan. Now, even though a lot of people did believe the world was round, again, not too many of them were willing to risk their fortunes gambling on an unproven theory. So Columbus he didn't have the resources to fund this expedition himself. So he's going around looking for investors. Italy turns him down, Portugal turns him down. As it so happens, a very new nation state of Spain is willing to take a gamble on Columbus's wild idea. Same year, 1492, earlier in this year, the two dominant kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula joined forces to form the nation state of Spain. So Spain, this brand new nation, just having established itself, is looking to enter this international competition that's taken place in Europe, this competition for influence and territories. Now, whereas England and France and some of the other nations of Europe, they're they're not really willing to risk a venture like Columbus. Spain is willing to take the chance because they're eager to make a name for themselves. They're eager to prove themselves as a nation. And of course, they are believing that if this pays off, if we gamble on Columbus and he's right, he finds a shortcut to Asia, then we're going to be in on the ground floor. We're going to be the first ones in the door to a direct trade link with Asia. Spain is willing to take a big risk here because they expect a big payoff. So the king and queen of Spain are going to finance Columbus's expedition. They'll provide him with money and ships, and he'll hire a crew, and he will set sail for China, headed west across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, we all know the legend, Columbus discovering America, which actually is not entirely accurate. Columbus never set foot in America. He ends up in the Caribbean, the island of Hispaniola. Today the island is shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But the Caribbean is where Columbus ends up. But he's convinced that he's arrived in the East Indies, which is what today is known as Indonesia, off the southeast coast of Asia. To his deathbed, he believed that he had arrived in Indonesia, and no one could convince him otherwise. Even when it was obvious to the rest of the world, he still believed that he had found his shortcut to Asia. Well, despite the fact that he failed to prove his theory that there was a direct water route to Asia, that doesn't make his significant or his discovery any less significant. What he found was of equal value, or maybe even greater value, to his sponsor of Spain. Even though he didn't find Spain never benefited from direct trade to China, but what they found instead was an equally valuable prize. Here we're looking at this map outlining some of the existing trade networks in the Trans-Eurasian trade community. Again, a lot of these overland trade routes were centuries old, some of them established by ancient Rome and ancient China. Again, this had been the primary method of travel, trade, and communication between Asia and the Mediterranean for many centuries. As a result of this trade, some of these Asian ideas and products were slowly starting to trickle their way into Europe. Europe's increasing demand for these things led them to search for a more direct trade link with Asia, and hence our Portuguese and Spanish explorers, here you see the dotted lines, they're trying to work their way around and find this shortcut, this water route, a direct link to the Indian Ocean and by extension East Asia. We see, of course, the Portuguese early on are going to be the leaders in this expedition for obvious reasons. Henry the Navigator in his School of Navigation gives Portugal kind of a head start on this process. So they began an obvious first step, exploring down the coast of Africa, setting up various trading posts and so forth, and eventually working their way around into the Indian Ocean. Columbus's idea was to sail west, sail across the horizon, and find a shortcut to Asia. Of course, as we just explained, he found something totally different. So again, we see this age of exploration, the European explorers beginning to search beyond Europe for more direct links to China, again trying to circumvent these age-old overland trade networks, ended up leading them to a new world. So Spain, as luck would have it, again, Spain rolled the dice on Columbus, and it paid off. It paid off big. Spain is going to have access now to this new world where resources, and especially terms of mineral wealth, is abundant. Spain is going to establish a large empire in Central and South America. Their efforts are going to be motivated primarily by what I like to refer to as the 3 Gs: gold, God, and glory. Each one of these motivations has multiple meanings. Despite the simple terminology, there's a little bit more going on here than meets the eye. Gold, obviously, we're not just looking for gold. In Spain's case, they will find a lot of actual gold, but we're talking too about economic prosperity, wealth and riches, not just in terms of mineral wealth, but just economic prosperity as well. God is going to be obviously religion here, Christian religion in particular. Europeans, as they attempted to spread their influence over new territories and spread their empires, religion was one of the things that they wanted to take with them. And this will take on a more complex nature after the Protestant Reformation, when we see both Catholic and Protestant variations of Christianity being in competition with each other as we see these empires spread into the New World. And of course, glory, we're talking about glory of the empire, glory of the nation, glory to the king, glory to the explorer who first set foot on that new land. Again, these three G's will characterize our motivations for the colonization of the New World. And we'll see too this theme recurring even after the American colonies are independent from England. Later on in our story, as American settlers begin moving west across North America, these same three motivations will be part of it. Americans looking for prosperity in the West, the idea of manifest destiny being one of their big motivators. Here again, religion playing a role, and of course the glory of the nation being at stake as well. So again, this is going to be a recurring theme. The three G's, part of our motivation for a lot of what goes on this semester. Spain's empire is going to be built largely on the conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires. Again, these two civilizations from Central and South America just so happened to be sitting on large deposits of gold. They possessed a lot of gold and silver in their culture, and of course they had access to the mines and the raw materials as well. So Spain is going to have direct access to these mineral resources by virtue of their conquering of these two empires. Spain will explore a little bit of North America, but they don't ever make a big effort to do so. A little bit of the Mississippi River Valley and what is today Florida and the Gulf Coast. Spain will make a cursory exploration of these territories, but they won't ever really establish any permanent colonies. Other than the colony of St. Augustine in Florida, Spain never really makes much of an attempt to colonize in North America. Basically what happened was from their initial exploration of the Mississippi River Valley, they determined that there was nothing there. There was nothing there of any value. Plus, they had already discovered gold and silver in the Aztec and Inca empires, so there was really no motivation for the Spanish to explore further into North America, which is going to leave it open for the British and French colonists to take control of that region. Within about 60 or 70 years of Columbus's initial expedition, Spain is going to establish an empire of 200 new cities and towns covering a vast territory of Central and South America. Now, as you can see, this doesn't happen overnight. Between Columbus's first voyage in 1492 and the mid-1500s, again, we're looking at a couple generations worth of time span here. But although it's a long process, a lot is accomplished in this relatively short time span. Spain is going to build one of the largest empires that Europe has ever seen. They're gonna obtain vast riches from this empire, and basically their conquest of the New World is going to elevate Spain to one of the most powerful nations in Europe at the time. They're going to be a dominant economic force, a dominant political and military force. Spain is going to be pretty much running the show for several generations. It's going to come at a cost, though, mainly to the native civilizations in Central and South America. It's estimated that around 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas is going to be dead by 1600. So within about 100 years of the arrival of Spain in the New World, about 90% of the population is going to be dead. Now, a lot of these people will be killed in battles of conquest and things of that nature, but disease is going to be the big killer here. Particularly smallpox and measles are the two big killers when we talk about imported European diseases having an impact on native cultures. Again, 90% is a large number, and it's an estimate, but it's based on observations by the Spanish explorers themselves as they first encountered the Aztec and Inca empires. Spanish explorers made rough estimates of the population sizes, and then again observations by those Spanish colonists a century later compared with the original observations. Again, we estimate that about 90% mortality rate among the native population. And this is just one aspect. This disease and destruction of the native population is just one aspect of what we call the Columbian exchange. Essentially, it's the transplant of crops, animals, and diseases back and forth across the Atlantic between Europe and the New World. We'll talk more about the Columbian exchange here in a minute in greater detail. Looking at our map here, we see kind of a breakdown of the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs and Incas. In the early 1500s, again, it just takes a few years after Columbus's initial voyages for Spain to gear up for a full-on conquest. So by the early 1500s, we see Cortez conquering the Aztecs, and then a few years later, Pizarro's conquest of the Inca Empire in South America. By about 1535, Spain's going to be fully in control of these territories and their empire fully established. So again, this happens relatively quickly. Again, within about 35, 40 years of their first arrival in this area, Spain is going to have conquered a vast territory and vast numbers of people. Our Columbian exchange map. This illustration really gives you an idea of what types of things are being transported back and forth between Europe and the Americas. Again, we're talking about crops, animals, and diseases. Smallpox and measles were the big killers, but malaria and yellow fever will work their way into the Americas as well from West Africa, and we'll see that happening later on as the Atlantic slave trade becomes a part of this story. We'll see more things being transported back and forth. Sugar and rice, both big cash crops coming out of Southeast Asia. Centuries earlier, Europeans had great success growing sugar in the Mediterranean using a plantation model of agriculture. They realized when they get to the New World that sugar and rice both grow well in the Caribbean, just like they did in Asia and the Mediterranean. No big surprise here. You see that the Caribbean is in the same general latitudinal range as Southeast Asia. So again, the climate and geography very similar here. Sugar and rice are going to grow very well, and this plantation model of agriculture is going to be imported to this region as well, which means a high demand for labor, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the Atlantic slave trade later on in the coming sessions. Other food crops from the New World into Europe: corn, potatoes, tobacco, beans. All these things are going to dramatically diversify the European diet. We're going to see European population growth start to take off in the years following the Columbian exchange because of these new foods. More food available, especially potatoes and beans. High starch, high protein crops are going to make a big difference in terms of the European diet. In North America, we're going to see a lot of cattle, horses, pigs, all those European livestock animals being brought into the New World. On both sides of the Atlantic, we're going to see dramatic changes in terms of agriculture and environment and the way people survive and subsist. It's going to have a dramatic long-term impact. And of course, today, our transatlantic trade network is built on the foundation established by this Columbian exchange. Still a very important part of world trade today, the transatlantic trade network. It all begins here with the Columbian exchange. All right, for a long time, Spain is going to be pretty much the only game in town. Spain had a huge head start on England and France. Again, by rolling the dice on Columbus, Spain is going to have a big advantage over the rest of European nations because they got to the New World first. They were the first ones to find the gold and the silver, and they're going to profit from it right away. This is going to elevate Spain to a position of prominence economically, and politically, and militarily. Again, with vast financial resources, Spain can build its empire and its military strength very rapidly. Another reason Spain is going to have such a big head start on the rest of the nations in Europe is that internally, Spain is very politically stable. Again, having recently united itself as a nation, Spain is eager to prove itself. It's eager to establish itself as a solid nation. There's, again, because of the political unity in Spain, they are able to benefit from that economically as well. Political stability and economic prosperity are tied very closely together, and that's true even today. So every time when we have a period of economic stability is when the economy usually grows most rapidly. Whenever there's political turmoil or instability in a country, it's at those times when that country's economy usually begins to suffer. So here we're seeing a good example of that. Spain, very stable, is going to enjoy a lot of prosperity. England and France, however, are suffering from a lot of internal conflict, and that's both political and religious. Having trouble deciding who's going to be in charge of these countries, which king is going to be the most dominant in each of these countries, and trying to centralize political control over themselves. And then, of course, the Protestant Reformation adds another layer of complexity. With the Protestant Reformation in 1515, we see a divergent branch of Christianity emerging. So we now have Protestantism and Catholicism both competing for influence among the people of Europe. France, of course, remaining faithful to Catholicism, and England embracing Protestantism. We see now, in addition to their international rivalries over territory and so forth, we see religious and spiritual rivalries taking place as well. Not just between England and France, but within each of those countries, there's going to be a lot of conflict too. Not everyone in England wanted to convert to Protestantism. Some people in France wanted to distance themselves from Catholicism. So within each of these countries too, we've got a lot of instability in terms of political and religious activities. This internal conflict is going to be a big obstacle to England and France doing anything else but attending to their own affairs. They don't really have the resources or the attention to divert to colonization because they're so focused on trying to stabilize things within their own countries. So again, this is going to put them at a disadvantage. Some of that is going to start to turn around in the mid-1500s. A new English monarch, Elizabeth I, is going to take the throne, and she's going to bring a lot of stability to England. She's going to institute a lot of political reforms. She's a strong leader, so again, she's able to bring a lot of this political stability. Again, some of her rules and laws that she institutes help to bring religious stability as well. And we see, once things settle down in England, we see them start to grow and prosper as well as a result. Pardon me. Growth of industry and new investment in business as a result of the internal stability. It's going to increase trade. English merchants now feel more secure and safe in investing in new enterprises, and we're going to see England start to obtain some economic prosperity, and they're going to start to develop a little bit of international influence as well. So we see with the rise of Elizabeth I, we see England start to transform itself into a more stable and influential country. They're going to get to the point where they are ready to challenge Spain. Now, toward the late 1500s, Elizabeth I, again, she's at her height of her power, and she is determined to challenge Spain for dominance in Europe. Now, as determined as she is, and as strong a leader as she is, she's not stupid. She knows that England, while they are making a comeback at this point, they're not quite ready to mount a direct challenge to Spain. Spain is still far too powerful for England to take on head to head. So Elizabeth has a more subtle approach. Basically, what she does is she has some of her, she tasks some of her sea captains with quiet, indiscreet explorations of North America, some small-scale surveys. Again, we're not talking about colonization here. We're just doing a few minor expeditions, survey expeditions into North America in the 1580s. In addition, she has one of her close advisors, a guy named Sir Francis Drake. He's a privateer. That's just a fancy word for pirate. She instructs him, of course this is all off the record and under the table, she instructs him to begin plundering Spanish merchant ships. She's of the thought, why go to the New World and compete with Spain directly for all this mineral wealth when we can just take it off their ships while they're out on the open seas and vulnerable. So this is what Drake and others like him do. They begin plundering Spanish ships. They find those ships on their way back to Europe fully loaded with gold and silver, and they just hijack them and seize the cargo. Of course, Philip II, King of Spain, he's not an idiot. He realizes where all this gold is going. Ships arrive empty. He's like, where's my gold? And the captain's like, well, pirates took it. And Philip II's like, pirates, huh? That sounds a lot like something England would do. So Philip II gets frustrated with Elizabeth's efforts to undermine his trade with the New World. So he launches the Spanish Armada in 1588. Again, this is Spain's attempt to stop England from plundering its ships and basically assert its dominance one more time over Europe. Now, this is one of those instances where a major turning point in history is affected by a random coincidence. As the Spanish Armada was sailing for England in 1588, a freak storm blows up over the English Channel and wipes out or decimates a large portion of the Spanish Armada, making them easy pickings for the smaller, weaker British fleet. So in this one battle, this random chance of fate, we see a major turning point in the history of Europe. Spain, after 1588, will begin a gradual decline, and England will begin a rise to prominence. So this moment, this one pivotal moment, prior to this moment, Spain was on top. They were the dominant power. And after 1588, we see a gradual transformation where Spain declines and England begins its rise. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take quite a few years for England to become the most dominant power in Europe. But here's where the process begins with this defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. So now, with the situation we're looking at now, it's no longer just a Spanish game. Colonization of the New World has many players in it at this point. We've already talked about Spain and their conquest of Central and South American peoples. We're going to see now with the rise of England, we're going to see a more deliberate attempt to colonize North America taking place. And it's not just going to be the English. I'm talking about the English here because in terms of U.S. history, England is our closest ancestor, basically. In terms of political and cultural identity, America is more closely tied to England than any of the other European countries. So one of the reasons in this class we're going to focus on the English part of the story is because of that close ties that we have. This is a U.S. history class, so we're going to focus more on the English part of the story. But you need to understand that at the same time England is colonizing North America, the French and the Dutch are going to be operating here simultaneously. So we've got three major countries all competing for control and influence of North America at the same time. Even though we're focused on an English story, there are other important players, and we'll talk about them as it comes up. Periodically, our English story will intersect with the French story and the Dutch story, and at those points, we'll talk about the French and the Dutch and how they play into this, even though we're focused primarily on the English. The Russians over here, we're not going to get into this, just to kind of an FYI. Russia, like Spain, is one of these newly emergent nation states, and they are also looking to spread influence and compete internationally for territory and prosperity. Most of their activity is in Asia, and again, we won't really be covering that since this is kind of a U.S. history course. We're focused more on what's going on here in North America. But it's important to know that what's happening here is part of a larger narrative. I know I told you in the course intro that timelines are not the best way to study history, but they are useful in some instances. Particularly now, this timeline illustrates very clearly what a time advantage Spain had over England and France in this race for colonies. Spain's conquest of Central and South America takes place almost 100 years before England and France ever get started in their efforts to colonize the New World. So again, 100 years is a long time, and this is part of why Spain is one of the dominant powers in Europe, because they got such an early head start. Again, Spain came from a position where they were brand new, nobody, no influence. They rolled the dice on Columbus, and it paid off big, and they were able to rise to prominence very quickly and maintain that prominence for a long time. So again, timeline is good to illustrate that fact. All right, let's turn our attention more fully now to England and the role that they're going to play in our story. As England sets out to attempt to colonize the New World, their efforts are very small to begin with. Sir Walter Raleigh, one of the good friends of Elizabeth I, he's one of the first people to be tasked with surveying and exploring North America. So in the 1580s, he comes to North America. He does an initial survey, and he claims the territory of Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth. Now, when we say Virginia, we're not talking about what is today the state of Virginia. Basically, in the eyes of Sir Walter Raleigh and Elizabeth I, Virginia refers to all of the east coast of North America. So again, this is a large territory that Raleigh has claimed in honor of England. He's going to establish a colony in 1585 on Roanoke Island. Now, this is just off the coast of North Carolina, or what is today North Carolina. Now, this is a small colony. He brings about 100 men, and again, it's just a small expeditionary force. They set up a small colony. Within a few months, it's a complete failure. They abandon the colony. They come back in a couple years with another group of men, and they bring some families too. A few women and children are part of this 1587 attempt. Same place, Roanoke Island. They set up a new colony, and they only do marginally better than the first attempt. But what happens is that right about the time the second attempt gets going, England goes to war with Spain. Remember the Spanish Armada. This is gonna create a severe delay in supply ships getting to Roanoke Island. Sir Walter Raleigh goes to the Queen, and he's like, "Hey, I need some supply ships to go reinforce my new colony over there in the New World." Elizabeth's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but we got this thing going on with Spain right now. I don't have the ships to spare. They're just going to have to hold on until we get over there again." So basically, by the time Raleigh comes back, and it's like 1590, Roanoke Island is gone. There's nobody there. There's no evidence of anyone ever having been there. Every trace of their existence is gone, as if they had just been erased from existence. So Raleigh is at a loss for an explanation here. There's a couple of expeditions in the surrounding area to try and find where the survivors went, if there were any, but no answers are found. They only had questions. They never determined the fate of this Roanoke colony. Some theories suggest that the survivors of Roanoke, once they realized they were not going to be resupplied or reinforced, they either by choice or by force, were absorbed into some of the local native tribes. It's unclear. There's not really any evidence to support that. But again, that's just one possible explanation. Again, one of history's mysteries here. What happened to Roanoke Island? No one will know for sure. They disappeared. So our first attempt to establish a British colony in North America is a complete failure. It could not have been more of a failure if they had planned it that way. In a few years, Elizabeth I dies. Her son, James I, will assume the throne. So the new king of England has got some new ideas about how colonization should take place. He meets with a group of British merchants in 1605, and they petition the king to authorize the creation of these joint stock companies. Basically, at this point, what's happening is that British colonization of the New World is now going to be a commercial venture, whereas before this was a royal directive. Again, this attempt to colonize North Carolina or Roanoke Island was directed by the crown. Here, James I is turning over responsibility for colonization to a commercial venture. So these merchants, they form these joint stock companies, and it's just like a corporation today. These companies will form, they will sell stock to investors who believe that they're going to make a profit. So private companies and individuals will invest money, they'll buy stock in these companies, and of course this is how the company gets its funds to mount these expeditions, and of course the investors expect to earn a profit. Now everybody is assuming that what happened with Spain will happen to England. All these investors in these joint stock companies, they are fully assuming, they're fully anticipating that they will find vast quantities of gold and silver, just like the Spanish did, and that they're going to become rich. So this is going to be kind of a get-rich-quick scheme. Two companies are formed by this charter, the Virginia Company and the Plymouth Company, each tasked with settling and colonizing a portion of Virginia. Again, we're referring to the entire east coast of North America. So the Virginia Company will settle the southern half of that east coast, and the Plymouth Company will settle the northern half. So what happens now is our two companies set out to establish a colony. First up is the Virginia Company and their attempt to establish a colony in what is today the Chesapeake Bay area, known as Jamestown. This is 1607. They actually leave in they form the company 1606. They don't get started till they leave in the summer of 1607. By the time they arrive in Jamestown, it's late in 1607. So our colony is formed officially in 1607. But they're going to get off to a really rough start. What ends up happening is when they establish this colony of Jamestown, they had several things working against them. First of all, the place they landed was in a very marshy, swampy area of the James River. It's not a good place to establish a settlement. The swampy conditions make mosquitoes rampant, and the spread of disease takes over very quickly. A lot of the colonists will die during that first winter of disease and starvation. The trip, just the ocean voyage to get them here, was rough. It took them a couple months, and a significant portion of them died along the way. So the few that remained alive at the end of the ocean voyage were left with trying to survive in a swampy, inhospitable conditions. Late in the year, too late to plant any crops or prepare for the winter. So again, between the ocean voyage, the environmental conditions, and that first winter, there's very few survivors left of this initial 100 men that were brought to Jamestown on that first voyage. So the spring of 1608 rolls around. We're looking at a ragtag handful of survivors that are barely struggling to wonder where their next meal is coming from. They're disorganized and unfocused. Again, one of their big problems is the fact that most of these men were businessmen. They were agents sent by the Virginia Company to look for gold and so they're focused on little else. They're when they should be looking for food and building shelter, they're digging holes looking for gold, and they're just not focused on anything productive. And all these factors are going to combine to put the Jamestown colony on the brink of annihilation early in 1608. It's at this point that one of the expedition members, a guy named John Smith, is going to take charge of this expedition. Now, granted, we're talking about just a handful of survivors here, just 20 or 30 men left. Smith is one of the few people in this expedition who has any kind of field experience. He had been on other survey expeditions before. He had some military experience. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He's smart. He's resourceful, and he's going to take charge of this expedition. He's like, okay, all you businessmen, put down those shovels. Stop looking for gold. If there was any gold here, we would have found it by now. We are now focused on survival. So he basically takes charge of this group as if it were a military unit. He starts giving orders. He starts forming groups of work gangs. Okay, you 3 people go collect firewood. You 4 people start working on shelter. You start hunting for food. Again, he gets them organized on survival tasks. He instills discipline. You don't work, you don't eat. Again, he comes down hard on them. Again, gets them focused and disciplined. They're now all their efforts are focused towards survival, and this works. They make it through that next first year. They're able to feed themselves. They've got some primitive shelters. They are focused now on survival. In addition, Smith is somewhat of a diplomat. His previous experience on prior expeditions has given him some experience interacting with local natives, and Smith reaches out to the Powhatan Indians, the dominant tribe in the area. Now, they had seen the Indians there. Indians had observed the Jamestown settlers. The settlers had seen them, but they hadn't really interacted much in those first few months. Smith reaches out to them. He sends a small group. He takes a small group with him to meet and greet the Powhatans. He's like, hey, just wanted to introduce ourselves. We're the British settlers at Jamestown. You might have noticed we're having a little bit of a hard time getting along. Any help that you could give us, advice, and so forth would be greatly appreciated. The Indians are like, fine, that's cool. You're new neighbors. We'll help you settle in and get started. At this point, the Indians don't see the settlers as a threat. For obvious reasons, these settlers, they don't even look like they know what they're doing, so how big of a threat could they possibly be? Plus, there's so few of them, what possible difference could it make if we help them or not? So again, the Indians are willing to help them out here and work together in a cooperative relationship. And this works fine for a little while. For a few years, Smith is able to get the Jamestown colony up and running. They're surviving, and of course, in the meantime, additional ships have arrived with more people and more supplies, so it makes it a little bit easier for them to survive. They're working with their Indian neighbors. The colony is now surviving. They're feeding themselves, and they're taking care of business, and they're getting some things done. However, this is a commercial venture. The stockholders back in London, they want to know where their money is. Okay, I gave you so many pounds last year as an investment. You said I was going to get rich. Where's my money? Where's my profit? Smith is like, okay, yeah, we're focused on other things right now. We're trying to survive. We're still trying to feed ourselves here. Your profits are going to have to wait. So the Virginia Company realizes, all right, well, fine, you got to survive. We get that. But we still are focused on profit. We still want this commercial venture to pay off. That's the main objective. Again, this is a business venture at this point. So what the Virginia Company decides to do is to create some incentives to get more people to come here. We figure the colony will be better able to feed and defend itself if we have more people there working. And again, Smith encourages the Virginia Company to send skilled craftsmen. Send me some carpenters and some masons and some hunters and some farmers. Don't send any more businessmen. We don't need any more. We need skilled labor. So when the Virginia Company decides to start offering an incentive, they're looking for these skilled people. One of the first things they do is to incorporate this headright system, and this is in 1616. Basically, the headright system is a land incentive. If you can pay your way to Jamestown, the Virginia Company will give you 50 acres of land just for showing up. You have enough money to buy your ticket on the boat, we'll take you to Jamestown and we'll give you 50 acres of land and you can do with it whatever you want to. So this is going to be a big incentive for a lot of people. Now the trip wasn't cheap. It was kind of expensive to pay for your way to get to Jamestown. But what's going to happen is that once you get there, you're going to be a landowner. If you can scrounge up the money for a ticket, you're going to be able to become a landowner. And this is an important part of status in European society. Only landowners have any say in anything. If you're not a landowner, basically you are inconsequential. You're a disposable member of society. As a landowner, however, you're going to have a voice in what goes on. So you're going to have status, something that you can pass on to your children. Again, this land ownership is going to be a big incentive. It's going to be a big draw. A lot of people are going to come to Jamestown to take advantage of this. And another aspect of this too, anybody you bring with you, they're going to give you an additional 50 acres. So let's say you're a small business owner, a merchant or farmer or whatever in England. You've got enough money saved up for a couple of tickets to the New World. You pay for yourself and your nephew or your brother-in-law or somebody. Virginia Company is going to give you 50 acres for yourself. They're going to give you 50 acres for having brought someone with you. Now you got to pay for their passage too, but you're going to get an additional 50 acres. So for every person you bring with you, you're going to get an additional 50 acres. So this adds up quickly, and we see some of these early settlers being able to amass quite a nice little piece of land to establish themselves in the New World. Later on, of course, as more people arrive, the company sees a need to organize the colony further. It's not just a small band of survivors anymore. There's a couple thousand people living there. We need to get them organized in some fashion. So the Virginia Company authorizes the creation of a House of Burgesses. And this House of Burgesses is basically a small representative assembly. A few representatives are elected by local landowners to govern the colony itself. Now, technically, as a British colony, they're still subject to British law, but this House of Burgesses is responsible for local laws. Who pays taxes in the colony, how much those taxes are, who has responsibility for what types of things, and so on and so forth. These are local laws. Now, this is not a British government initiative here. This was undertaken by the Virginia Company. So a commercial enterprise creating a small local government. So again, this is kind of a new pattern here. This type of thing hasn't really existed before. Why is this important? Because this is the beginning of representative government in America. All of our representative government that we have today can be traced back to this moment where the House of Burgesses was formed in Virginia, where we have a situation where the people in a society are electing representatives to govern them in that society. So again, this type of thing, representative government, didn't really exist in Europe. This is brand new. They're creating this. Now, while they're creating it just to govern this Jamestown colony, it sets a pattern for how the colonies are going to be governed from now on. And of course, this forms the basis of what we'll see in government structures later on in an independent United States. Still, though, the colony is surviving. They're growing. They are becoming more organized, but they're still not turning a profit. And this is due largely to the fact that nothing they're doing here is of any real value. They're still just focused on surviving, basically. Life is still rough here. A guy named John Rolfe is going to take over the colony. And Rolfe has spent time in the Caribbean. He's going to bring with him to Jamestown tobacco. Tobacco that he grew, or tobacco seeds that were being grown in the Caribbean. Rolfe is going to bring those to Jamestown. And as it turns out, these tobacco seeds are going to grow very well in the Virginia climate. Tobacco is going to lead to prosperity. For the first time now, the Jamestown colony is turning a profit. They're making money. And this is important because this was their whole purpose to begin with, was to make a profit. This is a commercial venture. Now, for the first time, again, they've been here for 10 years now, and now they are finally beginning to turn a profit. So the investors are trying to see some, they're finally seeing some return on their investment. It's not going to last for long, though. As you can imagine, with economic prosperity from tobacco, more people are going to be attracted to come here. More land is going to be claimed for tobacco farms and so forth, more settlers. That small group of survivors that the Indians were happy to share with has grown into a large colony that is continually hungry for new land. Well, this is not going to sit well with the Indians. They're not going to stand for this. They're going to start to push back against the colonists. Little conflicts will arise periodically over the years. At one point, Rolfe, in an attempt to make peace with the Indians, he marries the Indians, the Powhatan chief's daughter, Pocahontas. If you're familiar with the Pocahontas legend, here's where that comes into play. Rolfe marries Pocahontas in an attempt to make peace between the colonists and the Powhatans, and it works for a while. But a few years later, the chief dies, and his brother takes over the tribe. The new chief is not nearly as interested in peace as his brother, so we see conflict escalating. In 1622, an all-out war breaks out. The new chief of the Powhatans gets the Indians organized, and they attack Jamestown settlement in force, killing about 350 of the Jamestown settlers, which is about a fourth of their population at this point. And this sets off an on-again, off-again battle between the Indians and the colonists that's going to last for the next 20 years. And it's really going to cause the colony to become unprofitable. In fact, in the end, although the Jamestown colonists will defeat the Powhatans and push them back and claim their lands, it's too little too late, because the Virginia Company has lost all of its money here. There's been no profit in the final balance sheet. They're making a profit for a while, but this conflict kind of destroyed everything. So in the end, although the Powhatans were defeated, the colony loses its commercial charter, and the king, this is still James I, converts the Virginia colony into a royal colony. So it's now directly under the crown. It's no longer a commercial venture. So again, we see a lot of things happening in a very short time. The bottom line here is that Jamestown, while it's off to a rough start and they got a lot of problems, it is the first permanent English settlement in North America, and it becomes a model for later colonies and later attempts to settle by the British. And again, so it is important in that we see some of the patterns begin to emerge. The pattern of conflict between the natives and the settlers, the style of local government that will become a pattern in other colonies as well, economic incentives based on immigration and agriculture and so forth. Again, a lot of the patterns that are going to characterize colonization in the future are established with this Jamestown colony. One of the reasons why it's so important. All right, here we're looking at an illustration of a tobacco plantation in early Jamestown. As you can see, this is a very small scale operation. A family farm. Basically, the landowner here, the guy who came here, got his head right of 50 acres. He brought his son and wife with him, so maybe he gets another 50 acres for having brought his son. Women still are not counted in for anything in this society. But so again, he might have 50 or 100 acres that he's working here with his family, turning out a small crop of tobacco each year. And I noticed too, they're right on the water. This farm is right on the water, and that's on purpose, because once they harvest this tobacco, they've got to get it to market, which is in the Jamestown colony, where they're going to sell it to the Virginia Company, and of course it'll be transported back to Europe on a ship. And again, this is how a lot of people are going to make their money in Jamestown. This is how the colony is going to become prosperous, is the growing and selling of tobacco. Tobacco is a big cash crop, very popular in Europe. They're smoking it, they're sniffing it, they're doing all kinds of things with it. So it's a very valuable cash crop. This is going to be what gets the British colonies in North America up and running. And we see here, we're looking at the settlement pattern in and around Jamestown. Now, this is a large scale map. So again, these are not cities or towns. These are individual farms. And you can see they're really spread out along the James River. Here's the Jamestown Fort here down near the mouth of the river. And all up and down the river, we see these small farms, these settlements, and there'll be a few more forts and villages set up over the years. But primarily, we're looking at a very decentralized settlement pattern in this Jamestown area. And this is in 1640. So again, the colony is well established by this point. So again, here we see a very distinct settlement pattern based on small scale plantation agriculture and centered around Jamestown. That's really all we have time for today. When we come back next session, we'll talk a little bit about the Plymouth colony, the second British attempt to colonize the New World, and we'll talk about some comparative differences and similarities between Jamestown and Plymouth. So we'll see you next time.